Hi, Benj. Thanks for joining us today.
A pleasure to be here with you, Todd. I always enjoy our interviews together.
Great, great. Well, I hope our viewers find today either informative or entertaining.
Well, I ultimately hope that it's both, because if it's only one or the other, it's kind of half-assed. But you and me will do our best to, to make it both and, hit as close to 100% in each category on the continuum.
Perfect. That sounds good. Okay, well, there's plenty out there on your investing prowess, but we haven't talked a lot about Benj Gallander, or Benji as you were known. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, that's funny. As a kid, I was always known as Benji, and it was just completely the norm amongst family and friends. But then I decided when I went to Greece in 1984 to try on the moniker Ben. So I was there for 2 months, and for about 6 weeks, I gave it a good try, and it never quite seemed to fit me. There was something that always seemed too harsh about it. In 91, I was managing a newspaper, doing a turnaround, and there was a guy there, Lloyd Davis, who has actually now worked for us for about 20 years. And I heard him say over my screen, I can't call him Benji, I can't call him Benji. So I decided it was time to try something more adult. So I went to Benj. And it seems to have worked. So there's people who call me Benji, people who call me Benj. There's new people who sometimes just call me Benji, even on TV. And I just go with it. It doesn't make much of a difference to me. But, Ben just wasn't quite there, didn't quite hack it.
Just didn't quite fit. Hey, oh, interesting. Yeah, that's a neat journey. I like that. Um, so changing gears a little bit here, what brought you to the investing field? Did you always know you wanted to be in the investment field, or?
Well, I knew quite frankly that I always wanted to make money, and that was key. But when I was in grade 1 and 2, we always had to fill in a form, what do you want to be? My first choice was always baseball player, always. And my second choice was veterinarian. And I had turtles and fish and newts. And I realized some point later that there wasn't going to be a big demand for a veterinarian who specialized in those three fields. But baseball was the common element all the way through and has even continued pretty much to this day.
Huh. So what ended up happening to your baseball dream? I've heard bits and pieces. So.
Well, back in the day, I tried out for four major league teams. My first one when I was 15, the last one when I was, I guess, about 18, 19. But it's not like the teams called me up and said, we want Benji Gallander to come and try out. These were open tryouts, so anybody could go. When I went at 15, I was still tiny. I was probably about 4'8", 4'9", wasn't even 100 pounds, and they gave me one of their bats. And it was a major league bat. I could hardly swing it. And as my buddy Gabor said, I think at the end the pitcher was trying to throw the bat. So, throw the ball so it would hit your bat. He wasn't successful. I didn't make it. A few years later when I tried out for the Jays, I did somewhat better, but still not very good. So, I'm glad I tried it, and it was great to try. But evidently, my Major League Baseball days were only a dream.
Okay, fair enough. So I take it that's not how tryouts work these days?
How they work today, I think they still have open tryouts. Often but they'll have people come. Of course, they have scouts that go, and they'll watch people at different fields, etc. And that, of course, happened then too. So I don't know how much more it's changed or how much they do it through technology. Nobody's come to chase me down. So, I think fair enough to say that ship has sailed.
Fair enough. Okay. And do you still play these days, or how do you?
Well, until this thing called, you might have heard of it, the pandemic, I was still playing. And in the league I played, I was the oldest in the league. So I was over 60 and playing with a lot of guys, almost everybody in their 20s and 30s. And I could still compete, but my skill level had certainly gone down. Now that it'll be 2 seasons without playing, I think my career might have ended except throwing in the background with my lads. 2 years when you're in your 60s has more of a negative impact than 2 years when you're in your 20s. So the team may invite me back again. I think if they want to invite me back, sometimes they need a sub. Maybe I'll do that. My 20-year-old's really keen to play with him. He did play a few times, but you know, a big thing is I don't want to bring the team down, and I'm certainly not the player I used to be. So who knows? Who knows what will happen
it's
now?
a tough
But
call.
I think, yeah, my career is pretty much done.
Well, there's still baseball games, right? To go see.
Exactly, exactly. And hopefully get to a lot more games in a lot more cities and see a lot more ballparks.
Perfect. Good. So, I mean, baseball has definitely been a theme throughout. And in your first book, The Uncommon Investor, you brought a lot of metaphors in. I mean, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's my first book about stocks. My very first book that became a bestseller was the Canadian Small Business Survival Guide, which is still out there.
Right.
And if people want to go to our website at contratheheard.com, they can order that one there. The Uncommon Investor sold out, and it did really, really well. It was family and friends getting together, the seventh game of the World Series between the Toronto Blue Jays and the New York Mets.
Yeah.
You can figure out who won. And I included a lot of family and friends as players. As a matter of fact, the woman, Jane Jarris, who took me to the game where Joe Carter hit his historical home run, she's in the book. She hits a single, I believe. A lot of other people hit who are my friends. But the book, there are a lot of baseball metaphors, and it's a story. And it was fun to write because I could include not only investing in stocks and my ideas about that and other people's ideas, but I could have characters and write about baseball that way. So it was really enjoyable, and I'm so glad that it did so well.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. And so, switching gears here again, you did an MBA. What was the MBA in, and when and where did you do that as well?
Well, I did my undergrad at Western from 75 to 78. Then I took 3 years off and did a whole bunch of different things between working and traveling, etc. Then I went back for my MBA at Dalhousie University in Halifax. It was a great experience. I had hitchhiked through the Maritimes for 5 weeks before that, and I finished up after Newfoundland and PEI in Nova Scotia. So I spent some time in Halifax, and I really enjoyed the city. So I thought, this could be a good place to go. And I've always thought of education, school education, is more than just book education. And living in another place, working in another place, is a major part of education. So Halifax, I spent 2 years there. I made some great friends. I managed to get my MBA degree. It was a lot of fun. I saw a different life, and I've always appreciated that.
What do you mean by different life there?
Well, Toronto and Halifax are very, very different. So I've lived in different places in Canada. I also lived in Dawson City. I was at the Pierre Burden House, who was a famous Canadian writer, who wrote about 50 books. I was the writer in retreat there, and I worked on a book there. So, Dawson City is very different than Halifax. It's very different than Toronto. People have different attitudes. So I got to experience that. I managed to go back to Dalhousie a couple times to speak. I'd love it if they would invite me back again at some point. I would jump to go out there. I went back there. I'm a member of the Writers Union. So I went out there for the meetings then. Seeing the different parts of Canada, this is physically, geographically, it's an amazing country. The people are very diverse. I got to go to Laval University one summer, a whole different experience in Quebec, an amazing part of the country. So, it's something I want to do is travel more, both in Canada and other places, and gradually we'll be able to do it. It'll become simpler perhaps after next year if my youngest lad goes to university or college and we're ready to hit the road.
Perfect. And you'll
and
be
get more.
hitchhiking, I suppose, will you? Or
What's that?
I said you'll be hitchhiking, will you?
It's funny because my better half, she used to hitchhike and I did
Oh,
it.
yeah.
I don't know if we'll do it, although I sometimes think about it when I was in England and
yeah.
hitchhiked through England, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. I ended up at a youth hostel in Bristol. And I remember at the youth hostel, there was one guy, he was a real old timer because I was mid 20s. He was probably about 60. And every summer he would take off for a few weeks or a month and hitchhike. And I so admired this guy. I mean, everybody in the hostel was in their 20s, if I remember correctly, except for him. And I've often thought of emulating him in some ways. I don't perceive hitchhiking as being as dangerous as some people do. Of course, I'd be an easier mark now than when I was in my 20s. Not that I was exactly a tough guy back then. So I could see doing it. I went to Iceland at one point and hitchhiked through for a month. It was fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. So all of these adventures, but I'm not quite sure I'm as adventuresome as I used to be. Plus I have a few more bucks in the pocket.
Yeah,
So
sure.
that'll help to buy me some creature comforts.
Yeah. I agree with you on the hostels. I think it's an interesting learning experience being in those places because there's such a diverse mix of people that come together in a hostel. I mean, I remember myself one time I met a founder of a major tech company there. I won't talk about the company, but he was staying in a hostel, and it wasn't because he couldn't afford to stay elsewhere. It was that he wanted to be in a hostel and meet just other travelers, and yeah, I thought that was pretty neat.
Well, I met fascinating people when I was in a hostel in Austria. That's where I met Guy Petzel. And later on, Guy and I ended up writing a couple plays together, and we're still friends today. An American, he was there, and every day in that hostel they would show The Sound of Music. And the two of us were laughing at all these inappropriate moments, and it was like, maybe we have something in common. So a year or two later, I was working then for the Workers' Co-op Federation, setting up co-op businesses, and I had to take vacation time, and I always liked taking vacation time. So I called him up. We didn't have internet flowing freely back then in the same way, and said, "You want to get together and write a play?" He said, "Sure." So I flew there. We spent about 8 days in various states of mind and wrote a play, and 5 months later it was being performed and actually managed to do pretty well.
Wow, that's amazing. So just back to traveling. I mean, you mentioned you've traveled a lot of places. Are there any other places you've traveled that are of interest?
I've traveled to about 35 countries throughout Scandinavia, except for Finland. I got to go and speak in South Africa, thanks to McGill University, through lots of Europe. I worked in the Middle East, in Israel. I worked in France, leading bike tours. I worked in what was Czechoslovakia after the Velvet Revolution. I went for 3 months and stayed for 6. It was so wonderful. And then done a lot of the regular stuff like Jamaica and Cuba, Dominican Republic. And I'm hopeful to, keep on going different places. Still haven't been to Portugal. I only spent 2 nights in Italy from when I lived in France for a year, went over there. So I want to keep on doing it. How much I'll work in other countries, I don't know. But for people who want to really get to know people in the country, working there at the same time as you live there is critical. I mean, one of the unique places I went was Nepal. And a woman who I used to be the boss of, so to speak, at the Worker Co-op Federation here, she had gone back there to manage the organization of SESI in Africa and Asia. And she called me up 4 or 5 years after we worked together and said, what are you doing now? Are you interested in consulting? And I said, I'm not doing any consulting. I'm doing, the investment letter and other stuff. And we talked for about 10 minutes. And then I said, so what is it? And she said, it's in Nepal. And I thought, ooh, Nepal, sure. So then I went there for about 10 weeks, and she knew that some of the work that I had done on lending circles in Canada could be used in Nepal. So she was keen on me coming there, and they were having some problems. And then also computerization in remote areas. So it was a fabulous experience for me, completely different than anything else I had ever experienced. And so I worked with a lot of people, many from Quebec, and also many of the locals. And I got to travel via Pokhara through the trekking area. Just wholly different than anything I ever had seen.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Wow. Yeah, that certainly does seem like a neat way to do it, to work in a country and kind of really get to know the people.
Well, a lot of these things change when you have kids. We've still traveled a fair bit, and there's people who are more adventurous than me with kids. So now, get rid of them, and go and travel some more longer term. We'll see. Lots to do.
How has all this helped you with investing? Because I feel like there's some connection there.
How has it helped with investing?
Yeah, I feel like there's a connection between sort of all this other, we'll call it, that kind of flows back to the investing world for you.
Well, it's helped a lot. I remember before I went to Czechoslovakia, and when I was there, I mean, there was a lot to get rid of charcoal and carbon and that kind of thing. And when I lived in a small town in Czechoslovakia, I saw this was the primary way of heating. So it seemed to me there was still a need for it. So I came back and I invested in a West Shore Terminals here and one other company in the field. You get a lot of different ideas when you travel. You see things, you learn how to do things, and it all adds up and helps you become a better investor. You become a more global investor. Because if you're just sitting in one place and looking at one or different aspects in that place, you don't have the perspective you need to really invest well. So it's definitely helped me and made me far more aware. And I'd highly recommend it. For some people, they ended up starting companies based on what they see. So sometimes they can bring things back to Canada and start those outfits, which I didn't do. But I remember when I was in Nepal, and it was still relatively early days for the internet. It was the late 90s. And I remember we were doing the investment letter back then, and I remember when we were doing it, the internet throughout Nepal went out. So I couldn't communicate with Ben back here at that point in time. We had done some of it, and I tried going to different places to do it. Nothing worked. But that was over 20 years ago. The internet's a completely different animal now. But I had wonderful times and continue to have wonderful times. So
that's fantastic.
Traveling still is a part of it, but in a slightly different way. Hey, it's just in Niagara Falls for 2 days, and I love Niagara Falls. So a lot of people don't like it and say, "Ugh, Niagara Falls," but I like Clifton Hill. It's fun for me. What do I know?
I'll have to put that on my list then. Yeah. Good. Well,
you've never been?
I haven't. No, I have not. No.
Wow. Yeah. Well, it's something you should definitely do when you come to Toronto. And I know you now have a child, it's still a little bit too young, but there's so much to do there. I've gone with my family a lot. Once I took my two nephews, who are now 40 and 37, and we ended up camping in a park, illegally camping. And at what hour of the morning, I don't know when, the police came, they shined a light on us. They said, "What are you doing here?" We're camping. And the police officer was kind enough to say, "You can stay for the night, but get out in the morning." And both my nephews remember that. And it's a great story for us. It was adventuresome. I wouldn't camp illegally at Niagara Falls now, or would I?
At least not that you'd admit to, yeah.
Yeah.
Good, good. Well, shifting gears here a little bit,
Hmm?
your co-founder Ben Stadelman and you started Summer Works Theater Festival in 1991. Can you tell us a little bit about how that happened and it's become a
Yeah,
big
we
deal?
started with four other friends, Carol Pauker, Rob Sherwood, actually three other friends, and Greg Holmgren. Um, we all wanted to put on plays, and we applied to get into the Fringe. Unfortunately, none of us got in. And Rob and Ben had gone to the Fringe gathering, and they said, I had said to Ben, let's get together. Ben and I met at the University of Western Ontario, became firm, fast friends. I wanted to get together and just talk about our lives because we hadn't seen each other for a while. Then Rob said, oh, I hear you guys are getting together. Let's get together and talk about theater. Then Carol said she wanted to get together, and Greg Holmgren was the only one of us who knew about theater. He came. So we had a gathering at the place where I was living. We literally had two new people who had just moved in. It was not a commune, but there was people came and went.
Yeah.
So it's a Monday night. We had pasta, we had lots of wine, smoke filled the air, and we thought maybe we can start our own theater festival.
Yeah.
We knew there was pent up demand.
Yeah.
So I knew it was a great party. Somebody literally missed their flight the next day. Somebody missed work. I went to the Eye Opener newspaper where I was working, and I wasn't in great shape. My mind was very flat. But I could certainly do spreadsheets because they do the work. So what I did was I plugged in all these numbers to see if we could possibly do it.
Yeah.
And it seemed feasible if we got the groups to put in $400 and take 80% of the box office.
Okay.
So we then negotiated with the theaters. We talked to John Kaplan, who was a wonderful man at Now Magazine, unfortunately now deceased. We had, I don't know, somewhere around 30 applications to get in, and it's now celebrating its 31st anniversary. There's a magazine called Canadian Theatre Review.
Okay.
They interviewed us about 6 months ago. Their whole issue in September is going to be dedicated to Summer Works. The festival's allowed many writers, including me, many producers, many directors, a lot of actors to start their careers. A lot of pros have managed to put on shows in Summer Works. It has been an amazing, amazing success. And Laura, who's running it now, who's in charge of it, she's been there, I think it's about 5 years running the festival, and runs every August for 10 days, I believe. Again, come to Toronto, you go to Niagara Falls, you go to Summer Works, you'll do the town, and we're certainly going to have a bite to eat. Who knows, you might end up staying at my place, Todd.
That sounds amazing.
We'll see.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that sounds like just quite the journey, really. I mean, what's that? 31 years you said now?
This is the 31st year, and this year they're
unreal.
doing it a bit differently because of COVID, but they've got all these shows that are running starting August 1st. They're doing it in High Park, where there are shows every summer. They're doing shows from the 1st to the 15th there and other places. I have different babies, so to speak. My boys are certainly my babies. The theater festival is one of my babies, and I'm very, very proud of it.
No kidding. Oh, that's a neat
so is
accomplishment
Ben.
for sure.
It is.
Yeah. So
Very
I
lucky.
understand though at the same time the festival started, you actually wrote your first play at that time as well.
Yeah, I wrote my first play, God, Death Apparent God.
Okay.
5 people in the audience. They're all plants. 1 person on stage. It was Scott Mosley. I had big dreams for that play. It did all right. It didn't do amazingly well. It was all about God, basically, and different ways of looking at God.
Yeah.
With the idea being just accept other people. My buddy Todd, who my old production partner, he put on the play again with Scott, but just as a one-man show in front of the Eden Center on Yonge Street.
Oh, neat. Neat.
And Scott ran through a lot of his monologues. They then went to a place called the Imperial Pub Library, where I've had a few beverages over time.
Yeah.
They came back a couple hours later and people were still debating the play.
No way.
And that was a key goal for myself.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, neat.
And I've had 5 other plays that have been on. One here in Saskatoon.
Yeah.
One got picked up in Saskatoon and was on at a school in Saskatoon.
Amazing.
It went to a competition there. It did reasonably well. That one, I believe, was Dark Ages Romance, Pseudopod Rejects. Besides being done in Toronto and Sudbury, it was done in Aurora near Toronto. And all of these plays are available through the Playwrights Guild, where I'm still a member. I'd love them to be picked up again. We'll wait and see. I'm not holding my breath, but
Yeah.
it was fun to do. I don't know that I'll ever write another play. It takes a fair bit of time and effort. I'm not saying never, but the writing I do now for the Globe and other things, that's my focus.
Fair enough. Yeah, fair enough. Well, it's neat to have that in your back pocket. One day you might find the time.
Maybe, the beautiful thing about other people putting on your shows, like I flew to Saskatoon to watch it.
Yeah.
I spent, I think, 4 days there. It was minus 40, and as you know, minus 40 centigrade equals minus 40 Celsius, so you can choose.
Yeah.
I stayed downtown. I wandered around, but they did all the work.
Okay. Yeah.
And I went out for lunch with the actors, and they felt they were there with the big playwright from Toronto, which I wasn't. I was a playwright who had moderate success from Toronto. But, we all like having our ego stroked. When I went to Aurora to see the play, afterwards, I went out with the cast and the director, and we went out for wings and beer. And I had my designated driver with me, and I hadn't done that literally in a few years. It's great.
Yeah.
I'm out until midnight for wings and beer. I want to do it again soon. We'll have to wait and see. Yeah.
Oh, that's neat.
We all have our goals. Get me out for wings and beer. That's what I want to do.
All you have to do is write a play. Yeah.
There we go. Somebody just has to pick it up. That's it. Or maybe just go out with a friend for late night wings and beer. That'll do it.
Sounds good. Well, this has been a great chat, Benj, and I appreciate your time. We haven't talked too much about investing, so, I guess next time.
Well, it's fun to talk about other things, and of course there's lots of interviews with me out there all about investing, and people can always email me directly at gall@pathcom.com. Go through the website. There's lots out there. This has been a fun departure from what I normally do, Todd. I really appreciate that you've decided to do it this way.
Oh, I agree. I think it's very interesting. I think it's relevant. So so thanks again for coming and for sharing all this interesting content with us today, Benj. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd. It's been an absolute pleasure as always.
Okay, take care. Have a good evening.
You too.
Hi everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you'd like free access to our paid subscriber content, just click the link here and enter your email address here. Don't worry, we won't spam you, but if Contra does ever offer a major discount to the newsletter, we'll let you know. Otherwise, you'll just be receiving our premium video content through this channel. So we look forward to seeing you there. Happy investing.